closed the door. Bruce Lee said quietly, his voice steady but urgent, as the last sliver of hallway light narrowed to a thin blade across the wooden floor. The room fell into a hush so complete that even the faint hum of the city outside seemed to hesitate. Across from him stood Muhammad Ali, shoulders relaxed, eyes alert, not the gaze of a showman before a crowd, but a man weighing a moment that might never be repeated. 7 witnesses lingered along the walls, unsure whether they were about to watch history unfold or misunderstanding that should never have been arranged. No cameras, no reporters, no belts, just 2 men whose names had already outgrown arenas. "Are we really doing this?" someone whispered, as if the question itself might shatter the fragile agreement holding the room together. Ali's lips curved into a half-smile. "We're not here to hurt each other," he said, his tone calm, almost reflective. "We're here to understand. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard." No one moved. The air carried a weight that felt larger than pride or rivalry. It was about legacy, about respect, about whether greatness could recognize itself without needing to conquer. Outside, the world kept spinning, unaware that in this quiet room, 2 legends were about to test not just skill, but character. And for those 7 witnesses, what happened next would challenge everything they believed about strength, humility, and the true meaning of victory. The arrangement had begun as a rumor whisper between friends who moved in the same tight circles of athletes, trainers, and promoters. No contracts were drafted. No tickets were printed. The idea itself seemed too improbable to survive the light of day. Bruce Lee, the philosopher-warrior whose martial arts challenged tradition, and Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion whose words struck as swiftly as his fists, meeting not under stadium lights but in private. For weeks, the suggestion hovered in the realm of fantasy. Yet both men, separated by disciplines and cultures, shared a quiet curiosity about one another. Lee had studied film of Ali's footwork, admiring the rhythm, the looseness that defied the rigidity of classical boxing stances. Ali, in turn, had watched Lee's demonstrations, noting the speed that seemed to compress time. Each saw in the other not an opponent, but a question. What does mastery look like beyond the boundaries of one's own art? The 7 witnesses were not chosen for status, but for trust. A trainer who had known Ali since his early days. A film producer who had worked with Lee and understood discretion. 2 mutual friends who believed the meeting might foster respect rather than rivalry. They gathered in a modest training space, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not grandeur, but honesty. No one spoke of winning. Yet beneath the surface, each man carried the burden of expectation. The world had crowned them icons. Could they meet simply as students? Bruce Lee arrived first, moving through the space with quiet familiarity, as though he were listening to the room. He touched the wooden floor with his palm, testing its give, then rose and began slow, deliberate stretches. His movements were precise, economical, every gesture serving a purpose. To an observer, it might have looked like preparation. To Lee, it was alignment, a way to quiet the noise of reputation and return to the present. He thought of his guiding principle, to be like water. Water did not compete. It adapted. It filled whatever shape it encountered. Today, the shape was unknown. When Ali entered, the atmosphere shifted, not with tension, but with presence. He greeted everyone by name, his warmth disarming. Gone was the booming bravado of press conferences. In its place was a man who understood the weight of being watched, even by only 7 pairs of eyes. "You move like you're dancing with the air," Ali said to Lee, nodding in appreciation. "And you move like the air makes way for you," Lee replied, a faint smile forming. The exchange was brief, but it carried the ease of mutual respect. There was no need for theatrics. In that small room, stripped of spectacle, both men seemed lighter, freed perhaps from the need to perform. Yet the question lingered. What happens when 2 philosophies meet in motion? The rules, if they could be called that, were simple. No strikes to injure, no intent to harm, and either man could stop at any time. This was not a sanctioned bout. It was an exploration. The witnesses nodded in agreement, though their hearts beat with the anticipation of something they could not fully name. Lee removed his shoes, preferring the direct connection between his feet and the floor. Ali loosened his shoulders, rolling them with fluidity that hinted at the countless rounds he had endured. The mirrors caught their reflections, multiplying the moment into endless possibilities. A silence settled, not awkward but reverent. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm or a revelation. Ali raised his hands, not in challenge but in readiness. Lee mirrored the gesture, his stance shifting with subtle adjustments, as if testing invisible currents. No bell rang. No announcer called their names. Yet the beginning was unmistakable. A shared breath, a narrowing of focus, and the first step toward each other. They circled slowly, each reading the other like a text written in a foreign language, yet somehow familiar. Ali's footwork was poetry, light, rhythmic, evasive. Lee's movement with geometry, angles, lines, efficiency. Neither rushed. The room held its breath. Ali feinted, a playful flicker of the shoulder. Lee responded not with force but with distance, his body sliding just out of range. It was not avoidance. It was conversation. "You're fast," Ali said, a note of admiration in his voice. "You're patient," Lee replied. To the witnesses, the exchange felt less like combat and more like a dialogue conducted in motion. Each man tested boundaries, not to dominate, but to understand. The tension lay not in the threat of injury, but in the possibility of revelation. That greatness might recognize its equal without needing to prove superiority. Yet beneath the calm, both men felt the pull of expectation, the world's unspoken demand that legends must clash. Could they resist that gravity? As the pace quickened, the differences in their disciplines became more apparent. Ali's jabs, even pulled short, carried the memory of impact. Lee's counters traced paths that seemed to anticipate movement before it happened. They were not striking. They were sketching possibilities in the air. Lee felt a flicker of excitement. This was not about winning. It was about discovery, about seeing how principles held under unfamiliar pressure. He adjusted his timing, experimenting with rhythm, testing how Ali responded to shifts in tempo. Ali, too, was learning. He noted how Lee closed distance without telegraphing intent, how his balance remained centered even in transition. This was not the predictable cadence of a boxing match. It demanded a different kind of awareness. "Feels like chess," Ali murmured. "Only if we forget the board," Lee answered. The witnesses exchanged glances. They had expected intensity, perhaps even conflict. Instead, they were witnessing curiosity made visible. But curiosity, like any force, could deepen into something more. Minutes passed, though time felt elastic. Sweat formed along Ali's brow, not from exertion alone, but from concentration. Lee's breathing remained steady, his chest rising and falling with measured control. Neither man sought to overwhelm the other. They were probing, adapting, refining. A moment came when Ali's glove brushed Lee's shoulder, a touch light enough to be symbolic, yet meaningful. Lee paused, acknowledging the contact with a nod. In another context, it might have scored a point. Here, it marked a milestone in understanding. "Your reach is a world of its own," Lee said. "And your timing lives in the future," Ali replied. The exchange drew a soft chuckle from one of the witnesses, quickly stifled. The room felt less like an arena and more like a classroom where both teacher and student changed roles without announcement. Yet even in this atmosphere of respect, an undercurrent remained. The knowledge that outside these walls, narratives would demand a winner. Inside, they were discovering something far less simple. Fatigue began to whisper the edges of the movements. Not exhaustion, but the subtle slowing that accompanies sustained focus. Ali lowered his hands briefly, rolling his neck, then resumed his stance. Lee shook out his arms, releasing tension with a controlled exhale. They paused, facing each other not as adversaries but as mirrors. Each saw in the other a reflection of discipline honed through years of sacrifice. The room, too, seemed to exhale, the witnesses shifting their weight as if released from a spell. "Why did you agree to this?" Ali asked quietly. Lee considered the question. "To see if respect can exist without victory," he said. Ali nodded, absorbing the words. "I've spent my life proving myself. Sometimes I wonder what's left when there's nothing to prove." The admission hung in the air, heavier than any punch. It was not weakness. It was honesty. And honesty, once spoken, changes the nature of every encounter. The midpoint arrived not with a strike, but with a decision. Ali stepped back, lowering his gloves completely. For a heartbeat, confusion flickered among the witnesses. Was the session over? I think I understand, Ali said, his voice carrying both relief and gravity. This isn't about who can land the last move. It's about knowing when not to. Lee remained still, then bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect rather than submission. The greatest fight is the one we refuse to turn into a war, he replied. In that moment, the purpose of the meeting crystallized. They had tested skill, yes, but more importantly, they had tested restraint. The turning point was not physical. It was philosophical. One of the witnesses felt a tightening in his chest, an unexpected emotion rising. He had come to see a clash of titans. Instead, he was witnessing a quiet agreement that strength did not require spectacle. But what would the world say if it ever knew? They resumed, not to compete, but to explore with newfound clarity. The movements were lighter now, freed from the shadow of expectation. Ali experimented with footwork patterns inspired by Lee's angles. Lee adapted to the rhythm of Ali's circling, finding harmony in its cadence. The witnesses leaned forward, sensing that something rare was unfolding. Not a contest, but collaboration. Two masters, each rooted in his own tradition, were discovering a shared language. Ali laughed softly as he sidestepped the swift advance. You're teaching me without saying a word. And you're answering questions I didn't know I had, Lee replied. The room, once heavy with anticipation, now felt charged with possibility. They were no longer guarding their disciplines as territories. They were expanding them. Yet the question remained. Could such a moment survive beyond these walls, in a world that thrives on rivalry? The session slowed to a gentle cadence, each movement deliberate and thoughtful. Ali removed his gloves, flexing his fingers as if reacquainting himself with their unguarded form. Lee wiped his brow with a towel offered by one of the witnesses, then returned to the center of the room. They stood facing each other, no longer in stance, but in presence. The mirrors reflected not combatants, but two men who had glimpsed the edges of their own philosophies. People will always ask who would have won, Ali said. Lee nodded. Let them ask. The answer belongs to them, not to us. It was not evasion. It was an acknowledgement that some truths lose meaning when forced into simple conclusions. The witnesses felt the weight of what they had seen. They had come expecting a story. They were leaving with a responsibility. As they sat together on the edge of the training mat, conversation replaced movement. They spoke of discipline, of the loneliness that accompanies excellence, of the pressure to remain invincible in the eyes of strangers. Their words carried the ease of shared experience, transcending differences in background and style. One witness, a trainer who had spent decades in gyms thick with ego, felt a quiet astonishment. He had seen champions refuse to touch gloves out of pride. Here were two legends discussing vulnerability, without fear. Ali spoke of the burden of being a symbol, of knowing that every gesture would be interpreted as strength or weakness. Lee spoke of challenging tradition, of the resistance that greets change. In their exchange, they found common ground not in technique, but in humanity. The room felt smaller now, more intimate. The myth of rivalry had dissolved, replaced by something far more enduring. Respect earned through understanding. When they rose to leave, the witnesses sensed that the moment was already becoming memory. No cameras had captured it. No scorecards recorded it. Yet its impact lingered in the air like the final note of a song. Ali extended his hand. Lee clasped it firmly, their grip neither dominant nor yielding. It was the handshake of equals. Take care of your gift, Ali said. Share yours with the world. Lee replied. The exchange was simple, but it carried the weight of mutual recognition. They had met not to diminish each other, but to affirm that greatness need not be solitary. As they parted, the witnesses understood that the story they would carry was not about a secret fight, but about a rare choice, to honor strength without demanding victory. In the weeks that followed, the 7 witnesses found themselves replaying the encounter in their minds. They had expected to debate who held the advantage. Instead, they found themselves reflecting on restraint, on the courage it takes to step back when the world expects a blow. One witness, a filmmaker, considered telling the story publicly. Yet each time he imagined the headlines, he felt a sense of loss. Reduced to spectacle, the meeting would become just another argument for fans to wage. He chose silence, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for what the moment had been. Some experiences, he realized, are diminished by exposure. The others reached similar conclusions. They spoke of the encounter only in private, sharing its lessons rather than its details. In doing so, they preserved its essence. Years passed, and the legends of both men continued to grow. Their public victories were celebrated, analyzed, and mythologized. Yet for those 7 witnesses, the most profound memory remained the quiet room where no one won and no one lost. They began to notice how often the world demanded conflict, how narratives of domination overshadowed stories of understanding. In their own lives, they found themselves choosing dialogue over argument, restraint over reaction. The meeting had not changed history in the way headlines measure change. It had changed individuals, and through them, it had altered countless small interactions that would never be recorded. Sometimes the greatest impact is not loud. It is cumulative. Looking back, the witnesses no longer framed the encounter as a secret fight. It had been a meeting of philosophies, a moment when 2 men chose respect over rivalry. In a world eager for winners and losers, they had offered a different possibility. That strength can be measured by the ability to listen, adapt, and refrain. The room where it happened has long since been repurposed, its mirrors reflecting new faces, new ambitions. Yet the lesson endures in quiet ways. In the trainer who teaches patience, in the filmmaker who seeks truth over spectacle, in the countless stories of restraint that ripple outward. Greatness, they learned, is not diminished by sharing the stage. It is amplified by humility. And perhaps that is the true shock the witnesses carried. Not that 2 legends met in secret, but that they left having proven that character, not conquest, defines a legacy. From which part of the country are you watching this story?